Hey, welcome to the first VirtualBerry podcast. I'm the doctor.
Oh, and I'm Dave Mio. Ha ha.
And today we're going to be talking about a topic very close to David's and my heart. One of the best action games on the market, Resident Evil.
Resident Evil. Yes. So, I guess we could start off saying, what was your first Resident Evil game?
I started the series a little late. My first Resident Evil game that got me hooked on the series was Resident Evil 4. Back in, when did that come out? 2005?
2004, I believe.
And ever since I played that game, I've been hooked.
Right. I remember that my first time playing, my brother, when I was little, I went to his house and he was playing this game on his PlayStation 1, and it looked really cool. And he was shooting zombies, and he told me this is called Resident Evil. And I found out it was the sequel, though. It was Resident Evil 2. And then about a year later, he beat it, and then he decided to give it to me. So my first game was Resident Evil 2. So technically, both of our first characters that we ever got to play with was Leon.
Yeah. I mean, he is a pretty instrumental character in the show. So, it's pretty crazy. It took JR, a year? You said a year to beat that game? And in one of our challenges, we beat it in, 2 hours?
Yeah, plus, Resident Evil 2 is, in my opinion, the shortest out of all of them.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's a long game because there's 4 different ways to get through the story.
Yeah, you can play through A and B of both Leon and Claire.
Yeah.
So, let's start off from the beginning. We're going to talk about the history of Resident Evil and where the story is going to take us in the future.
Yeah, exactly.
So, where'd it start off?
Well, I would say Resident Evil, but in 2000, the creators decided to make a prequel to the first game, which was Resident Evil 0. Which was going to come out for the Nintendo 64, but then, of course, the GameCube was going to come out in 2 months, so they were like, well, let's make this game come out for the GameCube and make some money off that.
Now, this was a rare instance where the prequel games was actually a pretty good story. I've heard of games and movies where they'd go back, with the Star Wars movies and shit like that,
right? Where
they make the prequel, and they kind of suck ass compared to the first ones. But with this game, it's on par with the rest of the Resident Evil games.
Right. It was still survival horror. You got to play both as a boy and a girl at the same time, switching back and forth. You played as female Rebecca Chambers, who was pretty much a nurse in a way for the team. She was on Bravo team, and the boy was Billy Cullen, who was once a Marine and fought out to be arrested because they think he killed 23 men or something like that.
Yeah, when his platoon got sent into Africa, which, when we played Resident Evil 5, seemed to be some sort of epic foreshadowing.
Yeah, of course no one really thought about that back in 2002. But of course the game takes place, it's pretty much the night before the mansion incident in Resident Evil, and it starts off on a train going through the Arkley Mountains, outskirts of Raccoon City, and ends up leading them later to the training facility where we find out that that's where soldiers for Umbrella get trained under.
This has been a question that's been bugging me since, I started playing the newer, not newer, but the older Resident Evil games. Where exactly is Raccoon City?
Raccoon City is actually is a town located in the state of New York.
Okay.
And it's believed, I've only heard rumors, but apparently they rebuilt a new Raccoon City, but I've never seen it before. But they decided to build a new one somewhere in Rhode Island. But I believe that's still rumored to this day.
Yeah.
Because no one has mentioned the future one. But yeah, the original Raccoon City was in was in New York itself.
So, we got Billy and Rebecca riding on the train through the Arclay Mountains when, out of nowhere, they're attacked, pretty much.
Yeah, by, like, of course, we got, like, zombies, which is the most common.
The staple of the Resident Evil franchise.
Yeah. And Cerberus, or as you would, the normal, common name, I would give him just zombie dog.
Yeah.
And other things. And you'll also end up fighting bosses like a giant scorpion on the train.
That thing was a pain when we played it on the Wii.
Yeah, and you're just like out going as Rebecca. You're like finding out like all your team members are slowly dying in front of you, and you can't find Enrico. He's like
your Mexican lover.
He's like ran off somewhere, and so now you're here with this guy with Billy, and also being on the train. We go to other cutscenes showing two other fellow characters. One really important, one side important, which ends up showing us Albert Wesker and William Birkin. Of course, Albert Wesker being the most noticeable, evil bad guy in the whole franchise, up to 5.
Most epic video game villain that I know of.
Of course, but in this part of the time, he's just a normal, mortal human. He's non-infected.
But that's his plan.
But, of course, he's the captain of STAR's Alpha team, which that's the one Chris and Jill is on, which we'll get onto later. And, of course, William Birkin is just a top, I guess you would say, a top scientist for Umbrella.
He's like the Bill Gates of genetic research.
Right, because like at this point we know there's a virus known as the T virus, and Birkin mentions in the game that he thinks he can come up with an even stronger virus known as the G virus, which of course we'll talk about here later on.
Now, after we get off the train, we find, like David said, we find ourselves in the training facility, which that's just a hell of a place to go.
Yeah, it's kind of similar like being in the mansion in Resident Evil, because there's all these rooms, a kitchen, basement, all this other stuff. And, you know, there's even torture chambers for some reason, I guess if you were bad.
Yeah.
But, and of course you'll lead to other creatures, such as, just for Zero, we had the infected monkeys.
Oh, those were bitches.
I guess that's what you would...
The bat.
Yeah, we had the giant bat. We had a giant centipede monster.
And then my favorite monster in the whole fucking series, the lurkers.
Yeah, the lurkers are like these pretty much mutated frogs, giant frogs, and they're I would say they're annoying as well, because say your partner is somewhere really high up and your other partner's on the ground, and the lurker comes out of nowhere and be like, "Hey guys, I'm gonna eat your partner," and then like sticks its frog-like tongue at your partner, and then you have to hurry up and get your ass down there, and by the time you're down there and you take fire at it, then it pretty much eats your partner down, because in this game, if your partner dies, you die.
And that's a constant in the next couple games, you know. When they brought that concept back full force in Resident Evil 5 and 4, because when Ashley dies or Sheva dies, you're pretty much boned.
And of course, the main creatures of Zero were the leeches.
Yes.
And which end up leading us to one of the moon masterminds of the game, which was James Marcus, who apparently was killed by both Wesker and Birkin because they were going to take over his research. But then, of course, the Queen Leech Marcus was studying on took control of his body and then made him pretty much look much younger.
That was probably one of the cooler, things that they could have done with that character. Bring him from this old ass guy who's about to die,
right, and
who does die by the hand of Wesker, rather, and then they bring him back to this almost Superman kind of deal where he's strong as hell and able to do whatever he wants.
Right.
And the big reveal scene is the thing I remember most of that game, aside from the lurkers, where he's standing up on the balcony.
Oh, yeah. And then he's like, because he's telling his backstory of what happened, and then out of nowhere he starts, and then he's like, and then he spits out leeches, and then he transforms because pretty much the queen leech inside of him has pretty much evolved and takes over his younger body and then becomes pretty much the boss.
Yeah.
And then you end up fighting the queen leech, and of course, I guess a normal scientific things, leeches don't like sunlight.
No.
So you have like Billy distract the queen while Rebecca, starts bringing the roof open by turning wheels.
Yeah, lucky they have sunlights and those.
Yeah, out of nowhere. So with the sunlight ends up, the leech is burning, and then of course the leech kicks both of them, and then of course Rebecca sees a revolver under this like desk or something.
Perfect Resident Evil
out of nowhere, and she's like, "Billy, catch!" And Billy's like, "Oh yeah, I got this."
Oh hell yeah!
And he's like, say goodnight, Queenie, and then they do the slow motion bullet going across the screen, and then of course one little bullet pulls out this gigantic ass hole, and then they run for it, and then of course the training facility blows up, and they end up being themselves on this mountain, and Rebecca sees a mansion below and says that must be the mansion that Enrico and maybe some of the other Bravo team members are at, and of course she says goodbye to Billy, and Billy gives her his dog tags, and they salute, and Billy just walks away, and he's never been seen again.
Well, they may bring him back in 7, if they make 7, that is.
Well, I'm sure they'll come up with some idea.
And now that scene on the mountaintop where they're looking down at the mountain, or the mansion, leads us to the next game.
Yeah, which is the original Resident Evil, which of course was the first one because it came out as one of PlayStation's biggest games at the time in 1996, and of course it got itself a remake in 2002 for the Nintendo GameCube.
One thing about the remake I liked is how they kept the live action cutscene at the beginning of the game.
Right.
It's that's actually the first game I've seen with a live action crew playing out the cutscene.
Yeah.
And this game takes place in, as I said, the mansion.
Yeah, because this is the very next night after Zero, and this is where Star's Alpha team goes in to go investigate because we haven't heard from Bravo in over a day now, and so Wesker takes his team out, and they go looking around the woods, and then they find Bravo team's helicopter just to see the guy's dead, and we also get introduced to 2 characters that end up being famous,
and several other not so famous.
And because we have Chris Redfield, which he's at this point one of the famous male characters. We got Jill Valentine, which is one of the famous female characters of the series, and then we got our characters that we'll either never see again or we'll just die.
Well, don't forget Wesker's in there too.
Well, of course, Albert Wesker is our captain, and we have Barry Burton, who
don't make me a sandwich.
Yeah, who has a thing for sandwiches, and and